Darwin's On the Origin of Species was published 1859. Darwin published his book On the Origin of Species on November 20, 1859. On the Origin of Species is a comprehensive work in which Charles Darwin explains his theory of evolution and the mechanism of natural selection. The book is one of the most influential and controversial scientific works of the 19th century. On the Origin of Species presents Darwin's thoughts that form the basis of the theory of evolution. In the book, Darwin proposes that species change over time, evolve from common ancestors, and that natural selection guides this process. These ideas posed a significant challenge to the prevailing creationist views of the time. On the Origin of Species is not only a scientific work, but also a milestone. Darwin's theories revolutionized evolutionary biology and provided a new perspective on modern biology. The book sparks significant religious and intellectual debates by proposing that humans have evolved from other species. On the Origin of Species attracts great attention immediately after its first edition and quickly sells out. Darwin's book creates a significant impact on the scientific community and the general public of that time. On the Origin of Species is still one of the fundamental sources for research on biology and evolution today. In his book, Darwin explains the similarities and differences between species based on his observations and research. Natural selection is essential for organisms to adapt and survive in their environment. Darwin proposes on the Origin of Species that natural selection is the primary mechanism of evolution. Organisms with similar characteristics may have adapted to the same environment. Darwin mentions in his book that fossils and morphological similarities can indicate evolutionary relationships. Darwin explains On the Origin of Species how natural selection can make organisms advantageous against environmental pressure. Natural selection is a process where species can change and adapt over time. Darwin emphasizes On the Origin of Species that evolution is a slow and continuous process. Darwin explains the importance of competition and adaptation among organisms On the Origin of Species. Darwin's book also contributes to the development of the science of genetics. On the Origin of Species, Darwin argues that the mechanism of natural selection is influential in the emergence of species. Darwin's book encourages the formation of hypotheses, a new method for scientific research. Darwin addresses the relationship between diversity and adaptation On the Origin of Species. On the Origin of Species includes many scientific concepts that contribute to the understanding of evolution. Darwin explains how natural selection shapes genetic changes within a population On the Origin of Species. Darwin's book describes how living organisms adapt to environmental changes. Darwin's work inspires many scientists to conduct research on the theory of evolution. On the Origin of Species not only has a significant impact on the scientific world, but also sparks debates in society. Darwin's book is criticized and attacked by those opposing the theory of evolution. On the Origin of Species is still a focal point of debates today and remains one of the fundamental sources for studies related to evolution. Darwin's book leaves a profound impact on science, philosophy, and society. On the Origin of Species is a groundbreaking work that explains the foundations of evolution and natural selection. Darwin's book enters the scope of not only biology, but also other disciplines. The Origin of Species shakes the worldview by suggesting that humans are related to other living beings. Darwin's book still addresses many topics that generate debates about evolution today. On the Origin of Species serves as a guide for scientific thinking and critical analysis. On the Origin of Species, Darwin provides examples of evolution from nature and his observations. the book Darwin published becomes a significant milestone by introducing the theory of evolution to the scientific world. On the Origin of Species communicates the mechanism of natural selection to a wide range of readers. Darwin's book attracts the reaction of those opposing the theory of evolution and contributes to the acceptance of evolution. On the Origin of Species explains not only natural selection, but also how certain species can undergo changes over generations. In his book, Darwin describes the adaptation abilities of species in the process of adapting to environmental changes. Darwin's work encourages the examination of the relationship between genetics and biochemistry with evolutionary biology. On the Origin of Species, Darwin proposes that living organisms evolve and diversify from common ancestors. On the Origin of Species is an important source for understanding the nature of science and comprehending evolution. Darwin's book includes numerous new discoveries and findings along with meticulous observations. On the Origin of Species examines how animal behaviors are shaped in the process of evolution. In his book, Darwin relies on long-term observation results to demonstrate that evolution occurs slowly and continuously. On the Origin of Species emphasizes that evolution encompasses not only living organisms, but also plants. Darwin's work demonstrates that evolution occurs not only in individuals, but also in populations of species. On the Origin of Species, Darwin supports the theory of evolution by providing numerous examples and evidence. On the Origin of Species contributes to the development of modern biology by explaining the fundamental principles of evolution.